and an understanding of what Indian cities are like. And I think just two comments here perhaps are interesting and important. One, that more than 90% of the cities in India are unplanned. And it is these unplanned cities which actually demonstrate a very, very organic relationship between different classes of people and show a very vibrant space of the poor who've been able to assert their space in these cities. On the other hand, we have very few and rare examples of planned cities which have actually managed to keep the poor very clearly out from the cities. So this is like the classical thing that one needs to understand. But the presence of the poor is largely through what are called in officialese unauthorized settlements or slums, which also makes them vulnerable to acts of displacement and resettlement almost on an ongoing basis, to the extent that our municipal corporations and our local bodies engage in what are called displacement quotas. They actually have targets which are daily targets to demolish certain kinds of settlements. And the other end of displacement is where some of these displacements are really have like a very permanent edge. But we need to recognize that there is almost like a continuum of displacements. So some displacements which are like ongoing, regular, and settlements which get constructed all over again, but people live really like a daily existence, to, I think, at another point where there are much more permanent edges to more settled settlements which are also getting displaced. I think the second context perhaps which needs to be realized, that in the last 10 years in the entire country there seems to be a new wave where real estate and housing are really being used as fronts in order to advance, I would say, the advance of private capital, which is camouflaged through many different terms. They are called resettlement, they are called rehabilitation, they are called people's housing programs, and so on and so forth. But this is something which is happening very actively, and therefore it often becomes very difficult to even distinguish between these terms as to what is to be called displacement and what is to be called actually resettlement or rehabilitation or rehousing also. Okay? To my mind, most of these are camouflages, as I said. How does one look at resettlement then? And what are the things that can work or have worked? What are the experiences that show, that teach us? In my review at least, I have not seen one single positive example of resettlement. When one reviews literature the world over too, I think Cohen, who has reviewed so many resettlement projects, also concludes that there are very, very few positive examples of resettlement. In the context of India, what I can confidently say is that it is first important to recognize that every resettlement project is essentially a displacing project. So the kind of compensatory mechanisms that one creates are often not enough, and they are limited by the entire understanding of what kind of social fabrics are actually lost in this entire act of displacement and how does one compensate them best. So I have really not seen, in fact, any kind of comprehensive thought to what resettlement should be, what its packages should be like, what kind of processes should be in place, have only happened contrarily with internationally funded projects. Many of them World Bank funded projects where there are like international guidelines in place, where you have processes for redressal at multiple levels which are put in place and where experts are involved. On the other hand, the experience of all of these projects which have extremely elaborate guidelines, the outcomes do not show so many positive results at all, because the most